Every year, thousands of well-meaning travelers pack their bags, fly across the globe and head into these vulnerable communities.
Right, to build schools
Yeah.
or dig wells.
Exactly, or volunteer at local orphanages. And it's always framed as this, like, ultimate good deed. But what if that exact impulse, that deep desire to act as a savior, is actually displacing local workers?
Or destroying the environment.
Yeah. And in some of the most tragic cases, actively separating children from their families.
It is a profoundly uncomfortable question to ask, honestly, because we're so conditioned to view charity as this simple binary.
Right.
Like you're either helping or you aren't.
Right, there's no in between.
Exactly. But when you introduce global power dynamics and, well, immense wealth disparities into the mix, not to mention the massive global tourism industry, the binary completely collapses.
It just falls apart.
It really does. The reality of international volunteering is, it's vastly more complicated than a feel-good photo on social media might suggest.
And navigating that exact complexity is our mission today. We are exploring how you, the listener, can travel and volunteer ethically, without accidentally causing harm to the very people you want to support.
Which is such an important goal.
It is. So we're taking a deep dive into a 2025 academic chapter. It's titled International Volunteering and Regenerative Tourism by Ricardo Pacheco Coutinho and Bruno Barbosa Sousa. And I have to say, this research completely flips the script.
Oh, absolutely.
It demands that we look critically at what is fundamentally broken with the traditional voluntourism model.
It really does. The authors lay out a critique that is sobering, to say the least. Because before we can talk about a better way to travel, we have to unpack this concept of saviorism.
Right, saviorism.
Yeah. This is the phenomenon where volunteers, typically from highly privileged backgrounds, right, embark on these short-term trips. And whether they realize it or not, they end up prioritizing their own personal fulfillment over the actual nuanced needs of the host community.
It's that desire to feel like a hero, right? To be the active problem solver in the story.
Precisely. And that impulse very quickly bleeds into a form of neocolonialism.
Which is a heavy word. What does that look like in this context?
Well, in this context, neocolonialism means that external solutions are being imposed on a community by outsiders. Those outsiders center themselves as the experts, while the host community is just, treated as a passive recipient of aid.
Wow, so it's basically saying the locals don't know what they're doing.
Exactly. It reinforces this incredibly damaging stereotype of local incapacity. It essentially tells the community, you can't fix your own problems, so we have to fly in and do it for you.
It makes me think of an analogy. It's like showing up to a community potluck with a casserole no one actually asked for,
Right.
and then demanding everyone at the table eat it, and taking a selfie to prove how generously you fed the neighborhood.
That is a painfully accurate way to describe it. You're forcing an intervention without consulting the people it actually affects. And the consequences of that unwanted casserole, so to speak, can be devastating on a systemic level.
Yeah.
A prime example discussed in the research is the orphanage tourism industry, specifically in parts of Southeast Asia.
Right, because the surface level assumption there is that these children have no one else. And the volunteers are providing this essential, loving care, but the reality on the ground is completely different, isn't it?
Completely different. The research indicates that a shocking number of children in these programs are not actually orphans.
Wait, really? They aren't orphans?
No. They actually have living parents and extended families. But because well-meaning tourists are willing to pay significant fees to, volunteer with vulnerable children, a massive market demand has been created.
Oh my gosh. So the tourists are essentially subsidizing an industry that separates families.
Yes. Children are often placed in these institutions specifically to attract foreign volunteers. And, of course, the heavy donations that follow them.
That is just heartbreaking.
It is. It exploits the children, it exploits the goodwill of the travelers, and it actively undermines real systemic efforts to address root causes like poverty. Instead of helping a family stay together by providing economic support, the voluntourism model incentivizes pulling the family apart.
Just to maintain a supply of quote-unquote orphans for the next batch of volunteers.
Exactly.
That's just wild. And you see that same dynamic of outsiders imposing harm under the guise of help in completely different sectors too, like agriculture, right?
Yes, definitely. The chapter highlights agricultural development projects in rural Africa. Volunteers from Western countries have frequently arrived with their own seeds, their own farming equipment, and their own methods.
Just totally ignoring how things are already done.
Right. They entirely bypass indigenous farming knowledge, that has been adapted to the local soil and climate over centuries.
Because they just assume their modern external method is inherently superior. But let's look at how that actually plays out. If a group of volunteers brings in, say, water-heavy crops that thrive in a European climate,
Right.
ignoring the fact that local farmers have always cultivated drought-resistant roots, what happens when the dry season hits?
Well, the crops fail. The topsoil, which was aggressively tilled by foreign machinery, erodes. The environment is degraded, and the local community is left with ruined fields and broken equipment they can't even source parts to fix.
But wait, I have to push back here for a second.
Sure.
Let's step away from the extremes of orphanage exploitation or ecological disaster. Let's say a group of volunteers just wants to, I don't know, paint a health clinic or build a small schoolhouse in a severely under-resourced area.
Okay.
Isn't any help better than no help at all? I mean, if the village doesn't have the budget to pay local workers anyway, aren't the volunteers providing a net positive?
It is a very common defense. But if you look at the mechanics of how local economies function over a 5 or 10-year timeline, the research argues firmly against it.
Really?
Yes, because any help isn't actually helpful if it creates a cycle of dependency.
How so? Like, how does building a school create dependency?
Well, let's use your example. A group of low-skilled foreign volunteers flies in to lay bricks. First off, they are performing manual labor that could and should be providing paid income for a local bricklayer.
But what if the village can't afford to pay them initially?
Even if they couldn't, think about the thousands of dollars the volunteers spent on flights, agency fees, accommodations. That money could have been directly invested into a local grant to hire that local worker.
Oh, wow. Okay, so the money is there. It's just being spent on the volunteers' experience rather than the local economy.
Exactly. And the second issue is infrastructure decay. If volunteers build a structure or install a water well but don't train anyone locally to maintain it, what happens when the roof leaks?
Where the pump breaks 3 years later.
Right. The community doesn't have the technical knowledge or the ownership to fix it. They have to wait for the next group of foreign volunteers to arrive. So it diminishes community autonomy rather than building it.
Okay, let's unpack this. If traditional voluntourism is essentially flawed because it ignores local knowledge, displaces workers, and creates dependency, what is the alternative?
Right.
Because, I mean, people still want to travel, and they still want to contribute positively to the places they visit. And this is where the authors introduce a massive paradigm shift, right? Moving from simply sustaining a destination to actively regenerating it.
Yes, and that distinction is vital. For a long time, the gold standard in travel was sustainability. But traditional sustainability is fundamentally about minimizing harm.
Right, like leaving no trace.
Exactly, leaving no trace, reducing your carbon footprint, keeping things exactly as they are. But regenerative tourism argues that simply maintaining the status quo isn't enough, especially in communities that have already suffered environmental or economic damage.
It's about fixing what's broken, not just stopping it from breaking more.
Yes, it's about actively restoring and revitalizing the social, cultural, and ecological systems.
So if we go back to our analogies, sustainability is just trying to tread water so you don't sink. But regenerative tourism is working with the locals to build a better, stronger boat.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it. And the crucial element of building that better boat is co-creation. The community has to be in the driver's seat. They must dictate the terms of the engagement.
Which brings us to a really cool example. The research gives a fantastic contrast to those bad agricultural examples we talked about earlier. Instead of external methods causing crop failure, they point to mangrove restoration projects in Southeast Asia as a model of doing things right.
Oh, yeah. What's fascinating here is the complete reversal of power dynamics. In these mangrove projects, you have volunteers coming in to combat coastal erosion and enhance biodiversity.
Right.
But they aren't leading the charge.
Yeah.
The local communities own the resource management.
Meaning the locals are the experts and the volunteers are basically just the guest assistants.
Exactly. The volunteers provide the extra physical labor needed to plant the deep root systems of the mangroves, which, protect the shoreline from storm surges.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But because the locals own the resources, they're the ones who harvest the sustainable byproducts, like local crabs or honey that rely on that thriving mangrove ecosystem.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Right. The volunteers help restore the environment, but the initiative provides long-term, independent, sustainable livelihoods for the local population long after the tourists go home.
So if mangrove restoration handles the ecological side of things, How do communities ensure the financial benefits of tourism don't just leak out to massive foreign corporations? The source highlights a pilot program that solves exactly this, called the NORREG project, or the Nordic Regenerative Tourism Project.
Yes, the Norreg project is vital because it proved this concept works in highly developed economies too, specifically in rural Nordic communities.
Yeah.
And they do it by heavily focusing on empowering small, local, mom-and-pop businesses.
So instead of massive all-inclusive resorts or giant tour operators?
Right. Because when you focus on these small, place-based businesses, they become the facilitators of trust. Imagine it's a small, family-owned Nordic dairy farm.
Oh, picturing it.
Instead of a tourist just driving by on a giant bus taking pictures, the local farm co-creates an experience where tourists can come and learn traditional cheese making.
That sounds amazing, honestly.
It is. The farm gets an alternative revenue stream and extra hands. The tourist gets a profound, authentic educational experience. And the money stays entirely within the local rural economy. It builds economic resilience from the ground up.
But building that resilience, building that better boat, isn't just about the physical environment or the local economy. The authors make a very strong case that regenerative tourism requires a deeply interdisciplinary approach. They talk about the necessary reciprocity of soil, soul, and society.
It is a beautiful framework for holistic community health. To truly regenerate a destination, you need ecology to restore the physical environment that's the soil. You need economics for financial autonomy. You need sociology to build community cohesion and social capital. That's the society. And you need psychology to ensure the experiences are transformative, respectful, and meaningful for everyone involved.
The soul.
The soul, exactly.
And a huge part of that sociological piece is how volunteering acts as a mechanism for social inclusion. Like, the research points out that regenerative initiatives are incredibly powerful for integrating immigrants and minority groups within the host communities themselves.
Yeah, think about the mechanics of integration for a second. When immigrants or marginalized populations participate in community-based volunteer projects alongside local residents and visiting tourists, they are all working toward a shared, tangible goal.
You're all just in the dirt together getting it done.
Exactly. It naturally bridges cultural divides. It accelerates contextual language learning, far better than a classroom ever could, and it drastically reduces social isolation.
Which leads right into the psychological aspect. The source mentions something called a salutogenic perspective. Wait, salutogenic. I've heard of pathogens, like bacteria that cause disease. Is this the exact opposite of that?
Yes. Oh, I love this term. It is such a brilliant concept in psychology. Instead of focusing on pathogenic factors, which are the things that cause disease, stress, or trauma, the salutogenic approach focuses entirely on the factors that actively support human health, resilience, and well-being.
Okay, so it looks at the positive side.
Right. It asks what creates health rather than what causes illness. When immigrants and marginalized locals engage in meaningful, co-created volunteer work, it builds their sense of purpose. It gives them positive social connections and autonomy. It actively generates psychological well-being.
It's incredible how connected it all is. You fix the soil and you simultaneously heal the soul.
Beautifully put.
And the source gives us a really concrete example of this interdisciplinary approach in action. Jatiluwih Village in Bali. This village uses a highly inclusive model centered around women-led workshops focusing on traditional Balinese crafts.
And if you look closely at that single initiative, it hits every single metric of regeneration. Economically, it generates direct, independent income for the women.
Right.
Ecologically and culturally, it preserves traditional, sustainable materials and skills.
Oh.
Sociologically, it empowers a historically marginalized group to take active leadership roles in their local tourism management.
And psychologically, when foreign volunteers participate in those workshops, they aren't acting as saviors, they are explicitly positioned as students.
Exactly.
They are paying to sit down and be taught by local women. It fundamentally rewrites the power dynamic and builds massive mutual respect.
We see a very similar dynamic in sub-Saharan Africa, too, where volunteer-supported festivals are used to celebrate traditional music and dance.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The volunteers might help facilitate the logistics or set up the event, but the event itself is an unapologetic celebration of local identity. Music breaks down language barriers. It creates a space of shared humanity that brings in tourist revenue without forcing the community to compromise their cultural authenticity.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If a destination is doing all of this, if they are integrating immigrants, empowering women to lead, restoring their coastal ecosystems, and celebrating their heritage, How does that actually change the way you, the listener, the traveler, perceive that destination on a map?
It completely transforms the destination's image in the global market because volunteers who have these deeply authentic, respectful experiences don't just go home and forget about it.
They tell everyone they know.
They do. They act as informal, passionate ambassadors. They share narratives of a place that is hospitable, culturally vibrant, and committed to genuine resilience.
It attracts a totally different kind of tourist. Like, you stop getting the people who just want a cheap beach vacation, and you start attracting ethically minded travelers.
Precisely. The authors refer to concepts like soil-to-table gastronomy.
Which sounds delicious, by the way.
It does. This is where ecological restoration is tied directly to sustainable agriculture, which is then tied directly to local world-class culinary experiences. When a destination is known for that level of holistic, interconnected regeneration, it stands out in a very crowded, often highly commercialized global tourism market.
It becomes known as a place of harmony and forward-thinking innovation.
Exactly.
But, it's one thing to build these beautiful community workshops and organic farms during times of peace and economic stability. The real test of this regenerative boat we've been talking about is what happens when a hurricane hits.
Right.
Which brings us to how this model holds up under the immense pressure of a crisis.
Because a crisis is the ultimate stress test for a community's social capital and infrastructure. If you only practice traditional voluntourism, a crisis usually results in chaos. You get a massive influx of uncoordinated external aid that eventually just, well, dries up.
Leaving them exactly where they started, or worse.
Yeah. But the research shows that regenerative volunteering transforms disaster response. It moves it away from short-term Band-Aid recovery and turns it into long-term community empowerment.
The source looks at the devastating 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami as a prime example. The regenerative volunteer programs in the affected regions didn't just come in, hand out bottled water, rebuild a few identical houses, and leave.
Right.
They worked intimately with the locals to conduct deep disaster preparedness training. They focused on mitigating future risks.
And we saw this exact same principle applied after Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico. Volunteer-driven rebuilding efforts didn't just aim to patch up the old boat and return the island to the highly vulnerable status quo it was in before the storm.
Right.
They used the recovery as an opportunity to build a fundamentally stronger boat.
Yeah, they incorporated sustainable design principles that weren't there before. Like, they built flood-resistant structures, and they integrated solar panels and microgrids so the community wouldn't be reliant on a fragile central power system.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, resilience isn't just about bouncing back to where you were. It's about bouncing forward to a stronger, more adaptive state.
Bouncing forward, I love that.
And that forward momentum absolutely has to be driven by the community's own agency. The volunteers provide the extra hands, the funding, and perhaps specialized technical knowledge, but the local stakeholders dictate the direction of the rebuild.
Because long-term partnerships facilitate a gradual transfer of resources, it embeds that resilience right into the community's own framework. So when the next storm hits or the next economic downturn happens, they are fundamentally better equipped to handle it themselves.
Right, without needing to wait for foreign aid.
Exactly.
It breaks the cycle of dependency once and for all.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? It means that if you are planning to travel and volunteer, the preparation has to start long before you pack that suitcase. The authors heavily emphasize the need for what they call conscious travel.
Yes. It requires deep, sometimes uncomfortable self-reflection. You have to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Is it to pad my resume? Is it for the social media photos? Or is it to genuinely support a community's stated specific needs on their own terms?
And to do that, the source advocates strongly for intense pre-departure training. Not just logistical training about, where you're sleeping, but training focused on cultural sensitivity, history, and ethical engagement.
Which is so crucial.
It is. You need to understand the social context of the place you are visiting so you don't inadvertently act out those neocolonial dynamics we talked about at the start. You want to arrive as a respectful collaborator and a student ready to learn rather than a savior ready to fix.
It is about recognizing that true regenerative work is a mutual exchange. Yes, the community benefits from your physical support and your financial contribution, but you benefit profoundly from their indigenous knowledge, their cultural practices, and their worldview.
It really is a complete reframing of the tourist experience. We've covered a massive amount of ground today. We started by looking at the harmful pitfalls of traditional voluntourism, the savior complex, the tragic realities of orphanage tourism, and the dangers of displacing local workers and eroding local ecosystems.
And we charted the necessary shift toward regenerative tourism, moving away from just treading water and minimizing harm, and moving toward actively restoring environments, centering marginalized voices, and co-creating solutions where the host community actually holds the power.
We saw how that interdisciplinary approach connecting soil, soul, and society creates incredible initiatives, like those women-led craft workshops in Bali, or the Norwich project empowering rural Nordic mom-and-pop businesses. And we saw how that deeply woven social fabric allows communities to bounce forward, not just bounce back, after devastating crises.
It is a model of travel that doesn't just leave a place untouched. It leaves it actively stronger, more resilient, and deeply autonomous.
But before we wrap up, we want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over. Throughout this deep dive, the source material has focused entirely on how regenerative volunteering builds resilience in foreign destinations. It's all framed around what happens when you travel abroad.
Right.
But consider this. Could you take these exact same interdisciplinary principles, restoring the local ecosystem, centering marginalized voices, and building social cohesion across cultural divides, and apply them right where you are? What would it look like for you to become a regenerative volunteer in your own neighborhood or local hometown?
Oh, that's a great question.
Next time you think about packing a suitcase with good intentions, maybe take a look out your own front door first. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.